The ocean has always been a keeper of secrets vast, untamed, and whispering stories we've only begun to unravel. For thousands of years, brave souls have ventured into its depths, chasing horizons and vanishing without a trace, leaving behind riddles that still haunt us today. Picture this: a lone ship swallowed by the waves centuries ago, its crew and cargo lost to time. What happened to them? Where did they go? These aren't just tales, they're real mysteries etched into history, waiting for us to piece them together. From the Phoenicians to the Vikings, ancient mariners set sail with nothing but stars and courage, mapping the unknown in ways that defy logic. Some returned with legends. Others never came back at all. Their journeys, sometimes triumphant, often tragic, hold clues to civilizations we thought we understood. Imagine stumbling upon a sunken vessel, its artifacts frozen in time, whispering clues about a voyage that defied the odds. These aren't just shipwrecks, they're time capsules holding stories of ambition, disaster, and sometimes something far stranger. Today, we're diving deep into 25 of the most intriguing legends of ancient sea voyages and the explorers who disappeared without a trace. These aren't just footnotes in history, they're gripping sagas of human ingenuity and the unforgiving power of the sea. We'll unravel disappearances that baffle experts, uncover myths that might hold kernels of truth, and explore how these lost voyages shaped the world as we know it. So, ready your curiosity, because by the end of this journey, you'll never look at the ocean the same way again. One of history's strangest maritime riddles begins not with a single ship, but an entire vanished fleet, sent by Pharaoh Necho II of Egypt around 600 BC. The Greek historian Herodotus tells us Necho commissioned Phoenician sailors to attempt something astonishing, a full circumnavigation of Africa. If true, this would have been over 2,000 years before Europeans achieved the same feat. The crew reportedly set sail from the Red Sea, heading south along Africa's eastern coast. For 3 long years, they battled unknown currents, traded with distant cultures, and most incredibly, claimed the sun itself changed position in the sky as they rounded the continent's southern tip. Eventually, they returned through the Pillars of Hercules, the modern Strait of Gibraltar, completing a loop that should have rewritten history. But here's where things get murky. Herodotus himself openly doubted their story, calling their claim about the shifting sun impossible. Modern scholars are equally divided. Some argue the Phoenicians, master navigators of the ancient world, absolutely had the skills for such a journey. Others point out the total lack of archaeological evidence. No ship remnants, no trade goods, no records beyond Herodotus' brief mention. And then there's the timeline. 3 years seems shockingly fast for such a voyage with ancient technology. Could they have taken shortcuts, misinterpreted coastlines, or was this entire tale an exaggeration passed down through generations? Yet imagine if it's true. A successful circumnavigation that early would mean ancient sailors understood the Earth's shape long before the Greeks calculated it. It would rewrite our view of Phoenician maritime prowess and Egypt's ambition. Some researchers even speculate the voyage might explain mysterious cultural connections between West Africa and ancient Mediterranean artifacts. But until new evidence surfaces, Necho's lost fleet remains one of the ocean's greatest. What if stories a tantalizing hint that the ancient world might have been far more connected than we ever guessed? Decades after Pharaoh Necho's rumored expedition, another legendary voyage pushed the boundaries of the ancient world, this time led by the Carthaginian explorer Hanno in the 5th century BC. Unlike Necho's fleet, Hanno left behind a written account, the Periplus of Hanno, a fragmented log detailing his journey down West Africa's uncharted coast. But far from solving mysteries, his words only deepened them. Hanno's mission was bold: establish new colonies and explore lands beyond the known world. Setting sail with 60 ships and thousands of settlers, he ventured past the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic, founding trading posts along the way. Then the record turns surreal. Hanno describes encountering wild men clothed in hides, fiery landscapes, and an island overrun with what he called gorilla, hairy creatures his crew allegedly fought and later skinned. The descriptions are so bizarre that scholars still debate their meaning. Were these actually gorillas centuries before Europeans documented them, or was Hanno embellishing or mistaking what he saw? The biggest enigma is how far south he traveled. Some researchers argue his descriptions of volcanoes point to Mount Cameroon, suggesting he reached the Gulf of Guinea. Others propose he sailed as far as Sierra Leone or even Gabon, which would make his journey one of the most ambitious of antiquity. But skeptics counter that his distances don't add up, and the burning land could have been grass fires misremembered over time. Even the name Gorilla Island might have been a misheard local term, lost in translation across millennia. What's undeniable is Hanno's impact. His account became a cornerstone for later explorers, fueling myths about Africa's edges. And if even half his claims are true, he glimpsed a world far wilder than Mediterranean sailors ever imagined, a place where nature defied explanation and every coastline hid new wonders. Yet, like so many ancient mariners, Hanno's true legacy drifts between fact and legend, waiting for the ocean to give up its next clue. While Hanno pushed south into Africa's mysteries, another ancient explorer was sailing north into realms so cold and strange, his own people called him a liar. Pytheas of Massalia, a Greek astronomer, geographer, and daring navigator, set out in the 4th century BCE on a journey that would stretch the boundaries of the known world further than anyone thought possible. His destination, a place he called Thule, a land where the sun barely set in summer and the sea itself seemed to freeze. What makes Pytheas' account so extraordinary isn't just the distance he traveled, but the precision of his observations. He didn't just describe Thule, he measured tides, tracked the midnight sun, and even theorized about the connection between the moon and ocean currents. The debate over Thule's true location has raged for centuries. Some argue Pytheas reached Iceland, noting his descriptions of volcanic activity and endless summer daylight. Others propose Norway's coast, where the midnight sun aligns with his notes. But the most tantalizing theory suggests he ventured even farther, perhaps to the Shetland Islands or Greenland's edge, places so remote they might as well have been the edge of the world to Mediterranean sailors. Skeptics in his own time dismissed Thule as fantasy, but modern science has vindicated much of Pytheas' work. His notes on tidal patterns and Arctic phenomena were astonishingly accurate for someone with no modern instruments. What's often overlooked is how Pytheas' voyage changed the ancient worldview. Before him, the Arctic was pure myth, a blank space on maps filled with monsters and gods. After his journey, Greek scholars began to accept that the far north wasn't just habitable but held its own wonders. He even hinted at the existence of the Arctic Circle centuries before it was formally recognized. Yet, like so many explorers of his era, Pytheas' original writings are lost, surviving only in fragments quoted by later historians. That's the cruel irony of his legacy. The man who documented so meticulously now exists only in echoes. The real mystery isn't just where Thule was, but how Pytheas dared to sail there at all. With no compass, no charts, and no certainty of return, he relied on stars, instinct, and sheer curiosity. His ship, a fragile vessel by modern standards, braved waters even Vikings would later fear. And perhaps that's the lesson buried in his story. Sometimes the greatest discoveries begin as rumors, dismissed until someone bold enough to chase them proves the impossible true. The Roman Empire's reach stretched far beyond the Mediterranean, into the heart of the Indian Ocean, where merchant ships braved monsoons and rogue waves in pursuit of unimaginable riches. Pepper, pearls, and silk flowed along these ancient trade routes, but so did danger. Among the most tantalizing mysteries are the fleets that vanished without a trace, their fates swallowed by the sea. Emperor Augustus himself sent one such expedition, a grand armada tasked with securing direct trade with India. Historical fragments suggest over 120 ships set sail, laden with gold, wine, and silver to barter for spices. But only a handful ever returned. What happened to the rest? The Indian Ocean was no peaceful highway. Monsoon winds, while predictable, could turn deadly without warning, hurling ships onto hidden reefs or capsizing them in sudden squalls. Then there were pirates, bands of sea raiders who preyed on heavily laden Roman vessels, stealing cargo and enslaving crews. Some scholars point to the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a 1st century navigational guide, which warns of treacherous currents near the Horn of Africa where ships could be dragged into the open ocean, never to be seen again. But the most intriguing theory involves a simple miscalculation. Roman sailors relied heavily on celestial navigation and coastal landmarks, ventured too far from shore, and the stars could deceive. Some ships may have overshot India entirely, drifting into the vastness of the Bay of Bengal or even reaching Southeast Asia. Astonishingly, Roman coins and glassware have turned up in archaeological digs across southern India and Vietnam, hinting at contacts far beyond recorded routes. Were these artifacts carried by survivors of lost fleets, or proof of journeys so successful they were kept secret to protect lucrative trade monopolies? The silence of history only deepens the mystery. Unlike Mediterranean shipwrecks preserved in shallow waters, vessels lost in the Indian Ocean's depths are nearly impossible to find. Yet the legacy of these vanished ships lingers. They remind us that Rome's grandeur wasn't just built on conquests but on the courage, and sometimes the recklessness, of sailors who sailed past the edge of the known world, chasing fortunes they couldn't always bring home. Among the most spectacular maritime mysteries of the ancient world lies the fate of the missing ships from Admiral Zheng He's legendary treasure fleet. In the early 15th century, China's Ming dynasty launched what remains history's largest wooden armada, a staggering 317 ships crewed by 28,000 sailors, soldiers, and diplomats. Under Zheng He's command, these mammoth vessels, some stretching 400 feet long, made 7 epic voyages across the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as East Africa. But historical records hint that not all of them returned. The vanishing of these ships sparks 2 electrifying theories. The first suggests some vessels were caught in violent storms and lost at sea. Ming chronicles mention great winds swallowing entire fleets, and modern researchers have identified cyclone patterns in the Indian Ocean that could have devastated even Zheng He's colossal 9-masted junks. The second, even more tantalizing possibility, that rogue ships from the fleet drifted off course, possibly reaching the Americas decades before Columbus. This isn't pure speculation. Strands of evidence weave a curious thread. Ancient Chinese-style anchors found off California's coast, Ming Dynasty porcelain fragments in pre-Columbian burial sites, and even linguistic echoes between Chinese and Native American languages. Yet the truth remains maddeningly elusive. Official Ming records, usually meticulous, abruptly stop detailing later voyages, as if someone deliberately erased them. Some scholars argue the fleet's disappearance was political. A new emperor, hostile to exploration, purged records and scuttled ships to focus on domestic concerns. Others point to wrecks recently discovered near Indonesia and Kenya, where porcelain and ship timbers match Zheng He's era. Still, the most compelling clues might lie underwater. Advanced sonar scans off Sumatra have revealed what could be the remains of a treasure ship, its hull packed with Ming artifacts, but storms and shifting sands have kept it just out of reach. What's undeniable is how radically these missing ships could rewrite history. If even one junk reached the New World, it would upend Eurocentric narratives of exploration. But until a smoking gun emerges a shipwreck with undeniable Ming markings or a first-hand account buried in some forgotten archive, Zheng He's lost fleet remains one of the ocean's greatest what-ifs. A reminder that the past, like the sea, keeps its deepest secrets hidden beneath the waves. Far north of Zheng He's tropical trade routes, where icebergs tower like shattered castles, the Vikings etched their own maritime mysteries into history. While most remember Leif Erikson as the first European to set foot in North America around the year 1000, the full story of Norse exploration stretches far beyond a single landing, into whispers of settlements that flicker between archaeology and legend. The Icelandic sagas, those vivid tapestries of Viking courage and chaos, describe a place called Vinland where wild grapes grew thick and the winters were milder than Greenland's frozen grip. But pinpointing Vinland's exact location has sparked debates as fierce as any Viking raid. For centuries, scholars treated the sagas as mere folklore until 1960, when a Norwegian explorer stumbled upon the ruins of a Norse-style longhouse at Elant's Ox Meadows in Newfoundland. The discovery proved beyond doubt that Vikings had crossed the Atlantic centuries before Columbus. But here's the puzzle: Elant's Ox Meadows was small, likely a temporary base, not the sprawling Vinland of saga fame. So where was the real Vinland? Some argue it lay further south, perhaps in New Brunswick or even Massachusetts, where wild grapes did grow. Others point to strange clues, like the mysterious Newport Tower in Rhode Island, a stone structure some insist bears Norse architectural fingerprints, though most archaeologists dismiss it as colonial-era windmill. The most tantalizing gaps in the Vinland story aren't just geographical. Why did the Vikings abandon their North American foothold so quickly? The sagas blame skirmishes with indigenous peoples they called Skraelings, likely the Beothuk or Micmac. But newer research suggests a subtler culprit: economics. Greenland's Norse settlements, already stretched thin by climate shifts and dwindling trade, simply couldn't sustain distant colonies. Vinland wasn't a failure, it was a gamble that didn't pay off, yet traces linger. A Norse cloak pin found in Maine, a potential Viking-era coin in Maine's mud, each artifact sparks fresh questions. Were these lost by explorers or proof of trade networks stretching deeper into the continent than we ever guessed? What makes the Vinland enigma so gripping isn't just where the Vikings went, but how far their ambition outpaced their era. With no compasses, no charts, and no certainty of return, they sailed into fog-shrouded waters where even the stars were strangers. Their sagas speak of seas so thick with fish you could walk on them, of shores where daylight lingered like a stubborn guest. These weren't just tales to entertain, they were maps, passed down in verse, guiding later generations to lands their ancestors had only half believed were real. And somewhere beneath the soil of North America's eastern coast, the full story of Vinland still waits, as patient as the tides. West of Ireland, where the Atlantic swells rise like breathing giants, medieval maps marked an island that shouldn't exist: Hy-Brasil, a phantom shrouded in mist and mystery. For over 500 years, cartographers etched its circular shape onto parchment, placing it roughly 200 miles off Ireland's coast. Sailors told of seeing it materialize through the fog every 7 years, its cliffs glowing unnaturally beneath a low-hanging sun. But by the 19th century, as ships crisscrossed the Atlantic with better instruments, Hy-Brasil vanished from maps, leaving behind a question: was this island ever real, or just a collective dream woven from saltwater and longing? The legends surrounding Hy-Brasil are as layered as sea sediment. Celtic folklore described it as a paradise where an advanced race lived in eternal youth, bathed in the light of a magical red stone. Some tales claimed it was the remnant of a sunken kingdom, like Atlantis's Celtic cousin. Even the name hints at deeper roots. Brasil may derive from bres, an old Gaelic word meaning beauty or virtue, while Hy could stem from Iacute or island. European explorers took these myths seriously. In 1480, the navigator John Cabot reportedly diverted his voyage to search for it, convinced it held untold riches. Centuries later, Scottish sea captain Alexander Johnson swore he'd anchored there in 1674, describing black rabbits and a mysterious magician who vanished into thin air. Science offers compelling explanations, none of which dull the legend's shimmer. One theory points to the Porcupine Bank, a shallow underwater plateau that during extreme low tides might have exposed rocky outcrops. To exhausted sailors, glimpsing this fleeting landmass through storm spray could have seemed supernatural. Others blame Fata Morgana, a complex mirage caused by thermal inversions that distorts horizons, making distant objects like the cliffs of the Azores appear closer and floating. The most haunting possibility, that Hy-Brasil was a misremembered account of real but forgotten landfalls. The Faroe Islands, with their steep basaltic cliffs, match some descriptions, while the ephemeral Norse settlement in Greenland might have morphed into myth as knowledge of it faded. Yet the allure of Hy-Brasil endures because it taps into something primal, the human need for uncharted wonder. In an age when satellites map every inch of the globe, the idea that the ocean might still hide a vanishing island feels like rebellion. Modern expeditions have scanned the seabed where Hy-Brasil was said to lie, finding only the occasional shipwreck or geological oddity. But next time you stand on a western shore, squinting at the horizon where sky and sea blur, ask yourself, is that just the play of light on waves or the ghost of an island refusing to be forgotten? The sea, after all, loves its secrets. While the Vikings' footprints in North America are now etched in history books, an even stranger claim lingers in the shadows, a Welsh prince who allegedly crossed the Atlantic 300 years before Columbus. The legend of Madoc ab Owain Gwynedd begins in 1274, when medieval chronicles describe this shadowy royal figure fleeing a bloody succession war in Wales. With 10 ships and a band of followers, Madoc supposedly sailed west into uncharted waters, vanishing for years before returning with tales of a lush, distant land. Then, the story goes, he gathered more settlers and disappeared forever into what would later be called America. What makes this tale more than just folklore? Start with the accounts of early European explorers who reported encountering indigenous tribes speaking languages oddly reminiscent of Welsh. In 1669, the Reverend Morgan Jones swore he'd been captured by a tribe called the Tuscarora, who spared his life when they recognized his Welsh prayers. 2 centuries later, pioneers along the Ohio River claimed to find ancient stone forts and inscriptions matching Welsh Ogham script. The most infamous proof emerged in the early 1800s with the so-called Mandan tribe, a group of Native Americans with light eyes, fair complexions, and villages laid out like Welsh hill forts. Artists like George Catlin painted them as living evidence of Madoc's legacy, but here's where skepticism floods in. The Mandans' European features were likely the result of intermarriage with later fur traders, and their language bore no real resemblance to Welsh. Those mysterious stone forts, most were likely built by later settlers or misidentified indigenous structures. Even the original Madoc chronicles are suspect, written centuries after his supposed voyage, possibly to bolster Welsh claims in the age of exploration. Yet the myth refuses to die. In 1953, a Tennessee farmer unearthed the Bat Creek stone, inscribed with what some insisted was Welsh Sealbran script. Archaeologists later identified it as a probable 19th century hoax, but true believers still point to it as evidence. The enduring power of the Madoc legend lies in its emotional truth. For Welsh immigrants in the 1800s and 1900s, it was a source of pride, proof their ancestors had touched the New World first. For others, it fed the dangerous myth of white Indians, twisting indigenous history to fit European narratives. Today, the story serves as a cautionary tale about how easily wishful thinking can blur the line between discovery and deception. But buried beneath the hoaxes and nationalist agendas, there's a glimmer of possibility. The oceans have always been highways, not barriers. If Vikings could cross the Atlantic, why not a desperate Welsh prince? until some weathered ship's plank or indisputable inscription surfaces. Madoc's voyage remains where history and longing meet, a ghost ship sailing on the edge of plausibility. Deep in the waters of the Strait of Malacca, where monsoon winds still whisper of forgotten kingdoms, lies one of Southeast Asia's most tantalizing maritime mysteries, the lost gold fleet of the Malay Sultanate. According to oral histories passed down for generations, a royal armada carrying the treasury of an entire kingdom set sail in the 15th century, its hulls crammed with gold ingots, ceremonial daggers studded with rubies, and delicate lacquerware meant for tribute to a distant emperor. Then, without warning, a tempest swallowed the entire fleet, leaving no survivors, no wreckage, just rumors of unimaginable wealth lying beneath the waves. What makes this legend so compelling is the grain of truth buried in its core. Historical records from the Malacca Sultanate, a powerhouse of trade between China and the Indian Ocean, confirm that royal ships frequently transported vast treasures. Portuguese chronicles from their conquest of Malacca in 1511 describe seizing mountains of gold, hinting at even greater riches lost at sea. But the vanished fleet's existence straddles the line between fact and folklore. Some versions claim the storm was divine punishment for the Sultan's arrogance, while others insist pirates, perhaps even the notorious Anglaut sea nomads, ambushed the ships and spirited the treasure away. Modern treasure hunters have chased this legend for decades, armed with sonar and salvage rights. In the 1980s, a Singaporean expedition claimed to detect anomalies near the Riau Islands that matched the size of a 15th century fleet, but rough currents and murky visibility thwarted recovery efforts. Another team, funded by a Malaysian tycoon in 2012, dredged up fragments of Ming Dynasty porcelain near the strait, possible cargo from the era, but no gold. Skeptics argue the fleet's description aligns too neatly with regional storytelling tropes, where storms often symbolize karmic justice. Yet the strait remains one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, its seabed littered with centuries of wrecks. Could the gold fleet be hidden among them, or was its treasure never on those ships to begin with? The enduring power of this tale isn't just about the gold, it's about how history bends in the hands of those who tell it. For local fishermen, the story warns against greed. For historians, it's a puzzle piece in understanding Malay maritime dominance before colonial powers fractured the region. And for adventurers, it's the ultimate siren call, a reminder that some treasures refuse to be found, no matter how many maps you study or how deep you dive. The strait keeps its secrets close, letting the tides decide when or if to give them up. In 1832, fishermen off the coast of Washington state spotted something impossible, a battered wooden ship, its sails in tatters, drifting like a phantom on the currents. When they boarded it, they found a scene straight from a nightmare. The vessel was empty, its hull filled with rainwater, its only cargo the skeletal remains of 3 men. But the real shock came when they discovered the ship's origin. Carvings in the wood, fragments of pottery, and a handful of rice identified it as Japanese. This was the Hoaxes Maru, a humble coastal transport ship that had somehow crossed the entire Pacific Ocean, becoming one of history's most haunting drift voyages. How did a ship never designed for open water end up thousands of miles from home? The answer lies in the Kuroshio Current, a relentless river of seawater flowing east from Japan's coast. Historians pieced together that the Hoaxes Maru had been caught in a storm while carrying rice and ceramics between Kyoto and Edo, modern-day Tokyo. Stripped of its mast and rudder, it was pulled into the current's grip, joining a graveyard of other doomed vessels collectively dubbed ghost ships by sailors. But what sets this story apart are the survivors. While most drift voyages end in oblivion, the Hoaxes Maru carried clues hinting at a grueling fight for life. Diaries recovered from the wreck describe the crew resorting to eating leather and drinking rainwater before succumbing one by one. The impact of this ghost ship rippled far beyond its tragic end. For Japan, then under the isolationist Sakoku edicts, the Hojon Maru was a chilling anomaly, proof that even a closed nation couldn't escape the ocean's whims. For the West, it ignited fascination. American newspapers spun wild theories about Asian castaways, while scientists pored over its trajectory, realizing such drifts could explain puzzling cultural connections between Asia and the Americas. Some even speculated that ancient Japanese or Chinese ships, similarly caught in currents, might have reached the New World long before Europeans. Most haunting of all are the modern echoes of this legend. Even today, fishing boats and pleasure craft occasionally vanish into the Kuroshio, resurfacing years later as barnacled wrecks on North American shores. Each one revives the question, how many other vessels laden with untold stories are still adrift in the Pacific's vastness? The Hojon Maru reminds us that the ocean doesn't just separate lands, it connects them in ways as tragic as they are mysterious. Its ghostly voyage blurs the line between accident and fate, leaving us to wonder if some ships are destined to wander forever, carrying their secrets just beyond our reach. Among the most enigmatic disappearances in maritime history is the vanishing of the Ming dynasty's so-called Star Raft, a fleet sent in 1421 on a mission so ambitious, its failure became legend. Named for the celestial navigation that would guide it, this armada wasn't just carrying silk and porcelain. It bore a treasure far more precious in the eyes of Emperor Yongle, a giraffe. The animal, gifted by a Somali sultan, had been presented as proof of China's unrivaled reach, and the Star Raft was tasked with returning the gesture by delivering Ming envoys to Africa's eastern coast. Yet somewhere between the Malabar coast and the Red Sea, the entire fleet, ship's crew, and diplomatic gifts vanished without a trace. Theories about their fate are as tangled as monsoon winds. One account suggests the ships were dashed against the reefs of the Maldives, where fierce currents have claimed countless vessels. Locals there still whisper of a centuries-old wreck buried in coral, its timbers carved with dragon motifs. Others point to political intrigue. The Star Raft sailed during a turbulent time in Ming history, just as Emperor Yongle's successors began rejecting his outward-focused policies. Could rivals have sabotaged the mission to undermine his legacy? Some scholars cite cryptic court records hinting at treachery among the waves, though whether this referred to mutiny, piracy, or bureaucratic interference remains unclear. The most tantalizing possibility, though, lies in a series of artifacts found far off course. In 1898, a Sri Lankan fisherman hauled up a Ming-era porcelain bowl from the depths, its cobalt glaze still vivid. Decades later, divers off Oman discovered a bronze bell inscribed with characters from the Star Raft's home port. These fragments suggest the fleet might have veered wildly off course, perhaps caught in the same rogue currents that later doomed European traders. But the real mystery isn't just where the ships sank, it's what they carried. Rumors persist that the Star Raft held more than tribute: secret maps of Africa's interior, astronomical charts rivaling Zheng He's, even prototypes of advanced compasses. If true, their loss didn't just doom a diplomatic mission. It may have erased knowledge that could have rewritten the age of exploration. What lingers is the irony. The Star Raft was meant to showcase Ming China's mastery of the seas, yet its disappearance became a cautionary tale about the ocean's indifference to human ambition. Today, historians scour monsoon patterns and coral-encrusted wrecks, hoping to find a clue, a splinter of wood, a shard of pottery, that might finally explain how an entire fleet and the future it carried simply slipped beneath the waves. Long before European explorers braved the frozen wastes of Antarctica, Polynesian voyagers may have already glimpsed its icy shores, or at least that's what tantalizing fragments of oral history suggest. The idea seems outrageous at first glance. How could navigators from tropical islands crossing the Pacific in double-hulled canoes have possibly ventured into waters where icebergs loom and the very ocean freezes? Yet the more you examine Polynesian wayfinding skills, the less impossible it becomes. These weren't just sailors, they were human compasses reading stars, wave patterns, and even the flight paths of birds to traverse thousands of miles of open ocean with pinpoint accuracy. The strongest clues come from Aotearoa, modern New Zealand, where Maori traditions speak of a legendary explorer named Hy-Brasil. Around the 7th century, he allegedly sailed so far south that his crew encountered a place they called Te Taiuka Pier, the frozen ocean, where the sea turned to a slushy, arrowroot-like paste. Some researchers interpret this as drift ice or even the pack ice surrounding Antarctica. Supporting this are lesser-known Rarotongan oral histories describing a land of perpetual cold beyond the horizon, its waters filled with towering pia, a term used for both icebergs and the white bark of the arrowroot plant. These accounts align eerily with Antarctica's conditions, particularly the Ross Sea region where icebergs calve off glaciers in staggering numbers. Critics dismiss these stories as symbolic or exaggerated, but Polynesian navigation feats keep proving skeptics wrong. In 1976, the Hokulea canoe replicated ancient wayfinding techniques to sail from Hawaii to Tahiti without instruments, a journey once deemed impossible without modern tech. If Polynesians could routinely travel between tiny specks of land across 2,000 miles of Pacific, why not venture south into colder currents? Oceanographic studies reveal the South Pacific's prevailing winds and currents could indeed carry vessels toward Antarctic waters, especially if blown off course. And let's not forget the Polynesian appetite for exploration. These were cultures that settled Easter Island, the most isolated place on Earth, centuries before Europeans dared sail out of sight of land. The most compelling counterargument isn't about capability but motivation. Why risk such a voyage? Polynesian expansion was driven by resource scarcity and prestige, not abstract discovery. Yet Hy-Brasil's tale hints at another possibility: accidental exploration. A storm-driven canoe pushed far off its trading route could have stumbled upon the frozen ocean and lived to tell about it barely. Modern recreations show that Polynesian canoes, while fragile-looking, were astonishingly seaworthy in high waves, and if anyone could survive such a journey, it would be navigators who memorized the night sky like a map and could taste subtle shifts in seawater to find land. What's haunting is how little evidence might remain. Unlike European ships, Polynesian voyagers left few physical traces, no iron nails, no inscribed logs. Their canoes, built from organic materials, would have disintegrated in Antarctic waters long ago. The proof, if it exists, may lie in overlooked details: a sediment core from sub-Antarctic islands showing sudden pollen shifts hinting at human arrival, or a linguistic trace in Maori oral histories describing white cliffs that never melt. Until then, Hy-Brasil's voyage straddles the line between myth and history, a reminder that the past often holds whispers of truths we're just beginning to hear. The real lesson here isn't just about whether Polynesians reached Antarctica first. It's about how much we still underestimate ancient civilizations. For too long, Western academia dismissed oral traditions as folklore, only to watch science confirm them again and again. From the Aboriginal stories pinpointing submerged coastlines drowned by rising seas to Norse sagas guiding archaeologists to Viking sites in Canada, indigenous knowledge keeps proving its precision. Maybe the question isn't could they have done it, but why wouldn't they? After all, the ocean was never a barrier to the Polynesians, it was their highway. And highways, as we know, lead everywhere. In the 9th century, when Europe was still mired in the Dark Ages, Arab merchants were threading the Indian Ocean like masters of an aquatic Silk Road. Among them was Suleiman al-Tajir Suleiman the merchant, whose name survives not for his triumphs, but for the chilling mystery of his disappearance. Persian and Arab text from the era describe Suleiman as a seasoned trader, leading a fleet of dhows laden with frankincense, myrrh, and glassware from Basra to the Tang dynasty's bustling ports. His voyages were routine until one fateful journey in 851, when his ships vanished somewhere between the Malabar coast and the Strait of Malacca. What makes Suleiman's story so haunting isn't just the loss, it's how close we are to knowing exactly what happened, yet how tantalizingly the answers slip away. The primary clues come from two sources: the Akbar al-Sin Walhind accounts of China and India, a 9th century travelogue based on merchant reports, and the writings of geographer Ibn Khordad Bey. Both mention Suleiman's fleet encountering a tempest of unmatched fury near the Andaman Sea, a region notorious for sudden squalls that could overturn even the sturdiest dhow. But here's where the accounts diverge. Some versions claim the storm scattered the ships, leaving a few survivors to wash up on the Nicobar Islands, where they spoke of reefs like dragon's teeth tearing hulls apart. Others suggest a more sinister fate: pirates known as the Ramaya, who lurked in the strait's narrow channels, preying on storm-battered vessels. A single line in an Amani manuscript even hints at mutiny, with crewmen allegedly rebelling over a cargo dispute before the storm finished them off. Modern maritime archaeologists have pieced together plausible scenarios. The Andaman Sea's monsoon patterns from that era show a sharp increase in cyclonic activity around the mid-9th century, coinciding with Suleiman's disappearance. Shipwrecks discovered off Sumatra's coast, though not definitively linked to his fleet, reveal how quickly Indian ocean currents could drag stricken vessels onto razor-sharp coral. But the most compelling evidence might lie in oral traditions. Fishermen on Malaysia's Langkawi Islands still tell of ghost dhows seen during stormy nights, their sails tattered but their hulls gleaming with gold. Could these legends be distorted memories of Suleiman's doomed ships? What elevates this from mere tragedy to historical enigma are the ripple effects. Suleiman's disappearance triggered a decades-long decline in Arab trade with China, as merchants grew terrified of the Eastern Passage. Some scholars argue it even shifted the balance of power in the Indian Ocean, paving the way for the Srivijaya Empire's dominance over the strait. Yet the deeper mystery is what Suleiman carried beyond typical trade goods. Fragmented references mention a celestial device gifted to the Tang Emperor, possibly an early astrolabe or water clock, that could have revolutionized Chinese astronomy. Its loss, if real, represents more than sunken treasure. It's a hole in the timeline of technology, a what-if that might have altered scientific history. The ocean guards its secrets well. Suleiman's fate, like so many lost voyages, lingers in the space between record and rumor. But every monsoon season, when winds lash the Andaman Sea into a frenzy, it's hard not to wonder if the waves still whisper his name, or if somewhere beneath them, a shattered dhow's cargo holds the key to rewriting what we know of the ancient maritime world. Imagine holding a map that promised secret islands in the North Atlantic lands teeming with monasteries, hot springs, and even a mythical Christian king ruling over Arctic territories. That's exactly what the Zeno brothers of Venice offered the world in the 14th century, publishing a map and travel accounts that claimed to document their daring voyage to the far north. For over 200 years, their work was taken as gospel, shaping European exploration and even appearing in prestigious atlases. But here's the twist: the entire thing was likely an elaborate fabrication, one of history's most successful cartographic hoaxes. At first glance, the Zeno map seems convincing. It depicts places like Friesland, a sprawling island south of Iceland, and Estertilland, a vaguely North American coastline supposedly rich with forests and indigenous towns. The accompanying narrative, written by Antonio and Niccolo Zeno's descendant in the 1500s, describes their adventures sailing under the guidance of a mysterious prince named Zheng He. They spoke of volcanic eruptions, hostile natives, and even a monastery where monks recorded the movement of stars. The problem: none of these places ever existed. Friesland, which appeared on maps for centuries, was pure invention. Estertilland's description suspiciously mirrored later accounts of Newfoundland, but with details lifted from Scandinavian sagas and pure imagination. How did such an obvious fraud endure for so long? Part of the answer lies in the era's desperation for northern trade routes. With the Ottoman Empire controlling southern passages to Asia, European powers clung to any hint of an Arctic shortcut. The Zeno map, with its plausible-sounding details, offered hope. Even seasoned explorers like Martin Frobisher referenced it during his 16th-century quests, mistaking Greenland's coast for Friesland. The hoax also benefited from the Zeno family's prestige. Wealthy Venetian merchants with ties to the Republic's elite. Few dared question their accounts outright. Modern scholars have dissected the deception layer by layer. Linguistic analysis reveals the brothers' transcribed letters contain phrases and idioms that didn't exist in 14th-century Venetian. The map's geography, while creative, copies existing nautical charts with minor alterations, like moving the Faroe Islands or inventing phantom fjords. Most damningly, no records of Prince Zheng He or his exploits exist outside the Zeno narrative. Even the timing is suspect. The voyage allegedly occurred during the Black Death, when Venetian ships were grounded to prevent plague spread. Yet the legacy of this forgery is oddly profound. The Zeno map indirectly spurred real exploration by fueling competition among European powers. John Cabot may have sailed westward expecting to find Estatiland, inadvertently contributing to North America's discovery. The hoax also exposes how easily myth could masquerade as fact in an age before satellite imaging or verifiable travelogues. Today, the map serves as a cautionary tale about the seductive power of a well-told lie and a reminder that even the most trusted sources can lead us astray. The Arctic's true mysteries, it turns out, were far stranger than anything the Zenos could invent. The North Atlantic in the 16th century was a realm of danger and opportunity, where Basque whalers from northern Spain ventured farther than any European fishermen before them. Driven by the insatiable demand for whale oil used to light lamps and lubricate machinery across Europe, these sailors pushed into the frigid waters off Labrador and Newfoundland, establishing seasonal whaling stations that became ghost towns each winter. But some crews never made it home. Entire ships, sometimes 3 or 4 in a single season, would vanish without explanation, leaving behind only eerie silence and unanswered questions. The most haunting disappearances cluster around the coast of modern-day Canada, where Basque whalers clashed with the very environment they sought to conquer. Icebergs were a constant threat, lurking like white giants in the fog. Archival records from the port of St. Jean de Luz mention a ship called the San Juan, which departed for the Grand Banks in 1565 with 40 men and returned with none. A passing Dutch trader later reported seeing its hull pinned between 2 ice floes, the decks empty. Another account tells of the crew of the Santa Maria, who allegedly abandoned their ship after spotting mountains of ice moving against the wind, a possible reference to the strange optical illusions caused by Arctic mirages. Yet ice wasn't the only peril. The Basques' arrival overlapped with the Little Ice Age, a period of brutal cold that may have sparked conflict with the region's Inuit inhabitants. While some interactions were peaceful, trade for furs and meat did occur. Inuit oral histories describe violent clashes with foreign men who smelled of blubber. A particularly chilling tale from Greenland tells of a band of hunters who, after years of watching whalers deplete local whale populations, ambushed a stranded crew near Disco Bay. European artifacts found in Inuit archaeological sites, including Basque-made axes and iron nails, hint at encounters far darker than trade. The most perplexing cases involve ships that disappeared without even these fragments of evidence. In 1588, 5 vessels from the same whaling consortium failed to return despite calm weather that season. One theory suggests they fell victim to rogue waves, walls of water up to 100 feet tall that can emerge without warning in the North Atlantic. Others propose that inexperienced crews, lured by rising whale oil prices, may have sailed too far into uncharted shoals. A few conspiracy-minded historians even point to the Basques' secretive navigation techniques, speculating that rival nations sabotaged their ships to steal their coveted charts. What lingers is the scale of loss. By the early 1600s, entire Basque villages had lost generations of men to the whaling grounds, some with so many widows that local churches added special masses for the lost at sea. Modern underwater archaeology has begun to piece together their fate. In the 1970s, divers discovered the wreck of a Basque galleon near Red Bay, Labrador, its timbers scarred by ice, its hold still packed with barrels of rancid oil. But most wrecks lie too deep or scattered to tell their stories. The Basques' legacy is one of grit and grim irony. They perfected whaling techniques still used today, yet their knowledge couldn't save them from the ocean's whims. Their disappearances underscore a truth every sailor knows. The sea gives wealth, but it demands sacrifice. And in the foggy stretches off Newfoundland, where icebergs drift like forgotten monuments, those sacrifices still whisper in the wind. For centuries, sailors crossing the Atlantic whispered of an enchanted island halfway between Europe and the New World, a place marked on maps as Ilha Verde, the Green Island. Portuguese and Spanish charts from the 1400s and 1500s depict it clearly, a crescent-shaped landmass bursting with forests, its shores allegedly teeming with fresh water and wild game. Navigators swore they'd seen its misty outlines on the horizon, only for it to dissolve as they drew near. Some claimed it moved, drifting like a phantom between the Azores and the Canaries. Others insisted it was a gateway to St. Brendan's mythical isle or even Atlantis itself. But by the 1700s, Ilha Verde vanished from maps, entirely erased as if it had never existed. So what were generations of sailors really seeing? The legend begins with Portugal's Prince Henry the Navigator, whose explorers scoured the Atlantic for new territories. In 1432, one of his captains, Gonçalo Velho, reported spotting a lush, uninhabited island that matched Ilha Verde's description. The excitement was immediate. This could be the perfect way station for ships heading to Africa or the Indies. Yet when Velho returned with colonists, the island was nowhere to be found. Undeterred, Portuguese cartographers kept charting it, tweaking its position with each failed expedition. The most persistent theory suggests sailors were glimpsing the effects of Fata Morgana, a complex mirage that distorts distant objects. Under rare atmospheric conditions, the cliffs of the Azores' westernmost islands could appear magnified and inverted, creating the illusion of a separate landmass hovering just beyond reach. But there's another, darker possibility. In 1995, oceanographers discovered an enormous submerged plateau called the Horseshoe Seamounts near where Ilha Verde was often drawn. During the last ice age, when sea levels were lower, this area might have been an actual island, one that slowly drowned as glaciers melted. Ancient mariners could have encountered the last remnants of its peaks and forests before they vanished beneath the waves. If true, Ilha Verde wasn't a mirage but a memory, a ghost of a drowned world passed down through generations of sailors. The most tantalizing clue comes from an unexpected source: seaweed. The Sargasso Sea, a region of the Atlantic thick with floating sargassum, overlaps with Ilha Verde's supposed location. Medieval sailors, unfamiliar with this phenomenon, might have mistaken dense mats of seaweed for the outer edges of a green island. The Portuguese even dubbed one seaweed-clogged area Mar de Boga, the Berry Sea, further blurring the line between reality and myth. What's striking isn't just that Ilha Verde disappeared from maps, it's how fiercely people clung to its existence. For over 300 years, kings funded searches and sailors risked their lives chasing it. The island became a blank canvas for fantasies, a refuge for lost civilizations, a treasury of gold, even Eden itself. When Columbus sailed west, some whispered he was secretly hunting for Ilha Verde's riches. The truth, as always, is simpler and stranger. The ocean doesn't just hide real places, it conjures imaginary ones, playing tricks on the eyes and the heart. Ilha Verde wasn't a hoax or a mistake. It was a testament to the human need to believe there's always one more island just beyond the horizon, waiting to be found. In 1642, Dutch explorer Abel Tasman set sail from Batavia with 2 ships, the Heemskerk and the Zheng He, on a mission to chart the unknown southern seas. His voyage would mark Europe's first documented encounter with New Zealand, but not without a chilling twist. On December 18th, Tasman's men anchored in what's now Golden Bay, marveling at the towering cliffs and smoke from distant fires. Then everything went wrong. A group of Maori in waka canoes paddled toward them, and in a violent confrontation, 4 of Tasman's crew were killed, their bodies dragged away. The Dutch fled in terror, dubbing the site Murderers' Bay. But the real mystery isn't the clash itself, it's what happened to those missing men after their deaths, and why their fate sent ripples of fear through European exploration for decades. Maori oral histories passed down through generations offer a starkly different perspective. Tribal accounts describe the arrival of the floating fortresses as an ominous intrusion. To the Ngati Tumatakakiri people, these strange vessels with billowing sails weren't explorers, they were potential threats. When the Dutch launched a small boat to greet them, cultural misunderstandings spiraled into chaos. Maori warriors, trained to defend their territory, interpreted the unfamiliar trumpet blasts and gunfire as signs of aggression. The resulting skirmish wasn't random violence, it was a tragic collision of 2 worlds, each operating on entirely different rules of engagement. What's rarely discussed is the aftermath. Tasman's journals mention seeing his slain crewmen's bodies being taken ashore, but he never recorded their final fate. European historians long assumed they were eaten, a trope used to justify colonial fears, but modern scholars urge caution. Maori traditions surrounding warfare were complex, and the handling of fallen enemies often had spiritual significance. Some tribal historians suggest the bodies may have been preserved as taonga, or treasures, to honor their bravery, or even buried secretly to prevent the Dutch from returning to reclaim them. The legacy of this encounter shaped history in ways Tasman couldn't have imagined. His terrified retreat left New Zealand off European maps for over a century, delaying colonization until Cook's arrival in 1769. Meanwhile, the Ngati Tumatakakiri faced their own consequences. As word of the Pale invaders spread, neighboring tribes saw them as either protectors or provokers of future trouble. The tribe's influence grew briefly before fading, a reminder that first contact could elevate or unravel entire societies. Today, Golden Bay is peaceful, its dark history buried beneath golden sands and tourist kayaks. But dive deeper and the echoes remain. In 2018, archaeologists scanning the bay's waters detected anomalies that might match the Dutch ship's anchors. And among the Ngati Tumatakakiri's descendants, the story isn't just about conflict, it's about resilience. They speak of their ancestors not as killers, but as defenders who stood firm when the unknown sailed into their waters. Tasman's missing crew may never be found, but their brief, brutal encounter reminds us that every legend is a mirror showing vastly different truths depending on who holds it. The summer of 1715 was supposed to mark a triumphant return for Spain's treasure fleet. 12 ships, their holds crammed with silver from Mexico and gold from Peru, had gathered in Havana before setting sail for Europe. But on July 31st, just days into their voyage, disaster struck. A hurricane of unimaginable force roared across the Florida Straits, scattering the fleet like toys. By morning, 11 ships had been torn apart on the reefs or swallowed by the waves. Among them was the San Miguel, a bulky galleon whose manifest listed over 400 chests of silver coins, and whispers hinted at something far more valuable hidden in its deepest vaults. Unlike other wrecks from the infamous 1715 fleet, the San Miguel's final resting place remains a mystery. Salvagers have spent decades combing the stretch of coastline between Cape Canaveral and Fort Pierce, known today as Florida's Treasure Coast. Here, gold doubloons still wash ashore after storms, and divers occasionally stumble upon clusters of silver wedged between coral, but the San Miguel. Its wreckage has never been definitively found. Some believe the storm drove it far offshore where it sank in deep water. Others insist it lies hidden beneath the shifting sands, its hull fragmented but its treasure intact. The most tantalizing clue surfaced in 1985, when a salvage crew working a different wreck discovered a strange set of coordinates scribbled on a waterlogged parchment fragment. The writing matched the style of Spanish naval logs from the era, and the location pointed to a spot nearly 20 miles from where the rest of the fleet went down. Expeditions to the area have detected metallic masses on sonar, some large enough to be cannon or even treasure chests, but fierce currents and sudden sand shifts have made recovery impossible. Then there's the legend of the extra cargo. While official records list silver as the San Miguel's primary haul, persistent rumors suggest it carried something rarer, emeralds from the Muso mines of Colombia, smuggled aboard to avoid royal taxes. These weren't just any gems, they were fist-sized stones of unparalleled clarity, allegedly bound for the private collection of King Philip V himself. A handful of Muso emeralds matching that description have turned up in European auctions over the centuries, fueling speculation that at least some of the treasure was salvaged covertly, perhaps by survivors or opportunistic pirates. Modern technology has brought us closer than ever to solving the San Miguel's riddle. In 2018, a team using advanced magnetometers identified a submerged object near the mystery coordinates, its density consistent with a ship's cannon. But before they could investigate further, a legal battle erupted over salvage rights, proving that even 3 centuries later, the lure of Spanish gold can spark conflicts as fierce as any hurricane. What makes this wreck so compelling isn't just the treasure. It's the lingering question of human choices in the face of catastrophe. Survivors' accounts describe the San Miguel's captain ordering the cargo decks sealed as the storm approached, sacrificing any chance of lightening the ship to save its wealth for the crown. Did that decision doom the crew, or was the ship always fated to become another of the sea's reluctant guardians, keeping its secrets until the ocean decides otherwise? Until someone finally uncovers its bones, the San Miguel remains both a graveyard and a vault, a reminder that the line between history and legend is often as thin as a gold coin glinting in the sand. In 1845, Sir John Franklin led 2 of Britain's most advanced ships, the Erebus and Terror, into the Arctic's frozen grip. Their mission was bold: chart the elusive Northwest Passage, a shortcut through the top of the world that had lured explorers to their doom for centuries. The vessels were technological marvels for their time, reinforced with iron plating, heated by steam engines, and stocked with enough canned food to last 3 years. Yet within months, both ships and all 129 men vanished without a trace. What followed wasn't just a tragedy, but a mystery that would unravel in slow, horrifying fragments over the next century and a half. The first clues came from the Inuit, whose oral histories spoke of gaunt white men stumbling across the ice, some dragging boats filled with strange cargo. One account described a makeshift camp where corpses lay in tents, their bones cracked open, a grim suggestion of cannibalism among the starving crew. Victorian England recoiled at these reports, dismissing them as savage rumors. But when search parties finally discovered skeletal remains in the 1850s, the evidence was undeniable. Scorch marks on bones hinted at desperate attempts to boil marrow for sustenance. Notes found in a cairn revealed Franklin had died early, with the survivors eventually abandoning the ice-locked ships to march south toward certain death. For generations, the Arctic kept its secrets. Then, in 2014, something extraordinary happened. Climate change, melting sea ice at an unprecedented rate, unveiled the Erebus resting in just 36 feet of water near King William Island. 2 years later, the Terror was found eerily intact 60 miles away, her deck still scattered with bottles and plates as if the crew had just stepped away. Underwater archaeologists marveled at the preservation: sealed letters in the captain's desk, intact glassware in the officers' quarters, even the ghostly imprints of boots on the seabed. But the most chilling discoveries weren't artifacts, they were clues to the expedition's downfall. Analysis of the crew's remains revealed lethal levels of lead poisoning, likely from poorly soldered canned food. Others showed signs of scurvy, contradicting the Royal Navy's confidence in their provisions. Even the ship's advanced technology may have backfired. Their steam engines, untested in extreme cold, could have failed when needed most. But the real twist emerged when researchers studied Inuit accounts more closely. Stories passed down for generations described one ship sinking suddenly in deep water, while the other drifted for years, possibly reused by Inuit hunters before vanishing beneath the ice. These details, once dismissed as folklore, matched the wreck's locations with unsettling accuracy. The Franklin expedition's legacy is a paradox. It was a catastrophic failure that ultimately mapped the Northwest Passage through the crew's doomed wanderings. Their suffering exposed the arrogance of European exploration, the belief that technology and discipline could conquer any environment. Today, as the Arctic melts further, revealing more of their frozen graveyard, the Erebus and Terror serve as a warning. The same ice that swallowed them is now disappearing, opening the passage they sought at a cost no one could have imagined. Their story isn't just about the past, it's a mirror reflecting our own era's reckoning with ambition, survival, and the fragile edge between exploration and hubris. The Viking Age conjures images of longships raiding the coasts of England and France, but few realize some of these fierce explorers turned their prows eastward, sailing rivers so vast they might as well have been seas. Among the most tantalizing whispers of these eastern voyages are the Swedish runestones, crude but confident carvings that speak of men who ventured deep into the lands of the Rus, reaching as far as the Caspian Sea. These aren't just boasts, they're puzzles, because while Slavic chronicles vividly describe Norse traders navigating the Volga, not a single Viking ship has ever been found in these waters. So where did they all go? Take the Ingvar runestones, a cluster of 26 memorials scattered across Sweden. Each tells fragments of the same story. A chieftain named Ingvar led an expedition far east for gold, never to return. The stones don't specify his route, but Byzantine and Arab accounts from the same era mention Rus merchants, a term used for Scandinavian traders bringing furs and slaves down the Volga to trade with the Khazars and Abbasid Caliphate. One Persian geographer even wrote of tall men with axes sailing into the Caspian to raid its southern shores. The pieces fit except for one glaring absence. If Vikings sailed these rivers in droves, why hasn't archaeology found even one wreck? The answer may lie in the very rivers that made their journeys possible. Unlike the open ocean, Eastern Europe's waterways were shallow, shifting labyrinths. Viking longships designed for coastal raids would have been ill-suited for river travel. Historians suspect they switched to smaller, flat-bottomed boats built by Slavic craftsmen, vessels that could be hauled overland between rivers, but were flimsy compared to the sturdy oak longships of the West. These makeshift boats, left to rot or repurposed by locals, would have left little trace. Then there's the Volga's brutal winters. Ice could crush a ship trapped in its currents, scattering timbers across the riverbed where silt and flooding would bury them for good. But the most haunting theory involves a deliberate vanishing act. The Caspian's southern shores were ruled by Muslim states that saw the Vikings as pagans and threats. Arab texts recount battles where Rus ships were burned to the waterline, their crews executed or enslaved. If Ingvar's fleet met this fate, his ships may have been reduced to ashes, their remains dissolving into the very trade routes they helped create. Yet the runestones endure, their runes weathered but legible. They tell of Ingvar's brave men who sought wealth in the east, and of grieving families who raised these monuments to honor the lost. The stones don't speak of failure, they speak of ambition so vast it crossed continents. And perhaps that's the real legacy of these Eastern Vikings, not the ships they sailed, but the gaps they bridged between worlds, leaving behind not hulls of oak but stories carved in stone. Deep in the oral traditions of the Cook Islands, elders speak of a lost paradise called Tuanaki, a fertile island with towering coconut palms and crystalline lagoons that vanished beneath the waves without warning. Unlike fleeting mirages like Hy-Brasil, Tuanaki's legend comes with chilling specificity. Elders recount exact sailing directions passed down for generations. Sail 10 days southeast of Rarotonga until the currents grow warm, then watch for the laughter of birds. As late as the 1840s, Polynesian navigators claimed to have visited Tuanaki, describing its steep volcanic cliffs and a village where the inhabitants wore cloaks woven from rare seabird feathers. Then, sometime between 1842 and 1855, the island allegedly sank during a single cataclysmic night, leaving only whirlpools and scattered debris. European whalers first heard these stories in the 1860s, dismissing them as native superstition until an odd pattern emerged. Ship logs from the era noted abrupt changes in depth sounding near Tuanaki's supposed coordinates. One captain reported his lead line dropping suddenly from 100 to over 1,000 fathoms, as if the seafloor had collapsed beneath him. Then came the clincher. In 1889, a Royal Navy survey ship, the HMS Penguin, recorded a violent underwater disturbance near the area, with instruments detecting what we now recognize as the seismic signature of a submarine landslide. Geologists have since pieced together a plausible explanation. The region sits atop the volatile Pacific-Australian tectonic boundary, where underwater volcanoes frequently rise and fall. Sonar mapping reveals massive submarine cliffs and debris fields consistent with a catastrophic flank collapse similar to the much older destruction of Hawaii's Molokini crater. If Tuanaki existed, it may have been the peak of a volcanic cone that shattered like a dropped plate, sending millions of tons of rock plummeting into the abyss. But another theory suggests the island never sank at all, that generations of navigators mistook Rimataura, a real island 400 miles northwest, for Tuanaki due to currents pushing Voyages off course. Rimataura's description matches key details: crimson volcanic soil, a central peak, and even the presence of the now extinct Rimataura lorikeet, whose vibrant feathers were prized for cloaks. Proponents of this idea argue that when Cook Islanders returned to Rimataura after long absences, shifting coastlines from erosion or storm damage might have made it unrecognizable, fueling tales of its disappearance. The most haunting evidence comes from the ocean itself. In 2011, a deep-sea expedition scanning the Cook Islands seafloor discovered a series of submerged terraces at depths matching the timeline of Tuanaki's alleged sinking. Even more intriguing were coral samples dredged from the site. Their growth patterns indicated they'd spent centuries in shallow sunlight before being abruptly plunged into darkness. For believers, this was proof that something had indeed broken the surface long enough to sustain life before vanishing into the depths. What lingers isn't just the question of whether Tuanaki was real, but why its legend endures with such vividness. Unlike Atlantis or Mu, this wasn't a global myth. It was a local memory precise enough to guide sailors and describe customs. Perhaps that's the true lesson of Tuanaki. The ocean doesn't just erase islands, it erases entire ways of life, leaving behind only stories that ripple through time like echoes in a seashell. And sometimes those echoes hold more truth than we dare believe. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis stunned the world with a map so accurate, it defied everything Europeans knew about geography. His masterpiece, drawn on gazelle hide, depicted coastlines from Brazil to West Africa with eerie precision, but its most baffling detail lay far to the south. A jagged landmass labeled Antarctica appeared free of ice, its contours matching modern satellite scans of the continent beneath its glacial shell. The problem: Antarctica hadn't been officially discovered for another 300 years, and its ice cap is millions of years old. So how did a 16th century cartographer chart a land no human could have seen? Piri Reis himself provided a clue and deepened the mystery. In the map's margins, he scribbled notes claiming to have compiled it from 20 older sources, including maps from the time of Alexander the Great. Some scholars interpret this as a reference to the legendary Library of Alexandria, whose destruction erased untold ancient knowledge. Others suggest he accessed Portuguese or Arab charts from secret maritime archives, possibly even spy networks. The most radical theory, that his sources came from a lost civilization advanced enough to map Antarctica before it froze. The map's Antarctic segment, though fragmented, shows rivers and mountains where today there's only ice. Modern sonar surveys confirm these features exist under glaciers, aligning shockingly well with Piri Reis's outlines. Skeptics argue he simply guessed or reused distorted versions of South America's coastline. But his notations mention a warm current flowing southward, a detail matching the real Brazil current's path toward the Southern Ocean. This wasn't blind luck, it was data. What makes Piri Reis's work even more intriguing is its context. The Ottoman Empire, at its height, controlled trade routes linking Europe, Asia, and Africa. Its admirals had access to sailors' tales, captured maps, and merchant logs from every corner of the known world. Some historians propose that a forgotten Arab or Chinese expedition might have ventured south, blending fact with myth in documents Piri Reis later inherited. There's tantalizing evidence. Medieval Arab texts speak of a land beyond the wind, where the sun barely sets in summer, echoing Antarctic conditions. Yet the admiral's own fate adds another layer. After falling out of favor with the Sultan, Piri Reis was executed in 1553, and his remaining maps vanished. Were they destroyed to protect state secrets, or do fragments still lurk in Istanbul's forgotten archives? Modern searches have turned up empty, leaving us with only his surviving masterpiece and its haunting accuracy. The ocean keeps its secrets well, but perhaps somewhere, buried in a vault or at the bottom of the sea, lies the next clue to this ancient cartographic enigma. Until then, Piri Reis's map remains both a triumph and a taunt, a glimpse of knowledge that once was, and might yet be found again. In the late 16th century, as Japanese invaders swarmed Korea's coast, one man stood between them and total victory: Admiral Yi Sun-sin, a tactical genius who never lost a single naval battle despite being outnumbered in nearly every engagement. His secret weapon, the geobuxian or turtle ships, ironclad vessels bristling with cannons, their decks shielded by spiked wooden armor resembling a turtle's shell. These floating fortresses crushed enemy fleets, but their legend didn't end with his death in battle. For centuries after, fishermen and sailors reported eerie sightings of ghostly turtle ships gliding through fog banks, their oars silent, their decks manned by shadowy figures in Joseon-era armor. Were these mere mirages or something far stranger? The stories share unsettling details. Witnesses describe the ships appearing suddenly during storms or moonless nights, often near the sites of his greatest victories. In 1894, a British merchant vessel anchored off Nam He Island logged a near collision with a low, black-hulled craft that vanished moments later despite radar picking up nothing. Korean folklore insists these apparitions are his restless spirit forever defending his homeland. Some coastal villages even maintained shrines where offerings were made to the admiral's fleet, pleading for protection from typhoons and pirates. Historians offer more grounded theories. The turtle ship's design was so advanced for their time that later generations, finding remnants of their iron plating or unique hull shapes in shipyards, might have mistaken them for spectral relics. Others point to Korea's treacherous tidal currents, which can distort sounds and reflections, turning fishing boats into phantom armadas. But the most compelling explanation involves a deliberate deception. During the Imjin War, he famously used decoy fleets and false signals to confuse enemies. Could descendants of his tactics, reused by coastal defenders in later conflicts, have blurred the line between strategy and superstition? Yet science can't fully dismiss the encounters. In 2012, sonar scans near Hansen Island, site of his legendary victory in 1592, detected strange magnetic anomalies matching the size and shape of submerged turtle ships. Divers found nothing, but marine archaeologists noted the area's shifting sands could easily bury wreckage. Even skeptics admit the sea here plays tricks. Methane gas seeping from the seabed can create shimmering distortions, while bioluminescent plankton might explain reports of glowing hulls. The true power of his ghost fleet lies in its symbolism. Korea's naval hero became a national myth, his victories so improbable they seemed touched by destiny. The sightings peaked during times of foreign threat, the Japanese occupation of the early 20th century, the Korean War, as if the collective unconscious summoned his legend for comfort. Today, the phantom ships endure not just as folklore but as a reminder. Some leaders are so extraordinary, their presence lingers long after they're gone, etched into the waves they once commanded. Whether mirage, memory, or something in between, his fleet sails on, eternally vigilant in the waters where history and myth converge. Standing high in the Andes, the Inca Empire seemed a world apart from the vast Pacific. Yet tantalizing clues suggest their sailors may have ventured far beyond South America's shores, perhaps even reaching the distant islands of Polynesia. The most compelling evidence isn't carved in stone or preserved in temples. It's something far more ordinary: the humble sweet potato. This starchy crop, native to the Americas, was already thriving in Polynesia by the time European explorers arrived. How did it cross thousands of miles of open ocean centuries before Columbus? The answer might lie in balsa wood rafts, the same kind the Inca used to navigate coastal waters, and whose seaworthiness modern adventurers have tested with astonishing results. The sweet potato's journey is just the beginning. Linguists have long noted eerie similarities between Quechua, the language of the Inca, and Polynesian dialects. The word for sweet potato in Maori, kumara, mirrors the Quechua kayumara, a coincidence too precise to ignore. Even more striking are shared terms for fishing techniques and celestial navigation, suggesting more than accidental contact. But if these connections are real, why haven't we found physical traces of Inca voyages like shipwrecks or tools? The ocean may hold the answer. Unlike the Vikings' sturdy longships or Chinese junks, Inca rafts were built from lightweight balsa logs lashed together with hemp ropes, materials that decompose rapidly in seawater. A raft lost at sea would leave no archaeological trail, just whispers in language and botany. One man dared to test this theory. In 1947, ethnographer Thor Heyerdahl famously sailed the Kon-Tiki, a replica Inca raft from Peru to the Tuamotu Islands, a 4,000-mile journey that proved such voyages were possible with only wind and currents. Critics dismissed Heyerdahl's feat as a stunt, arguing that possibility doesn't equal proof. Yet recent oceanographic studies reveal something startling. The Humboldt Current, which sweeps up South America's coast, could carry a drifting raft directly into the South Pacific's heart. Add to this the Incas' documented skill in astronomy, their ability to navigate by stars mirrored Polynesian wayfinding, and the idea of accidental or intentional crossing seems less far-fetched. What's missing is the smoking gun, an artifact that definitively links the Inca to Polynesia. A few tantalizing hints exist, like the tumi, a ceremonial knife found in the Marquesas Islands that resembles Inca designs. But without inscriptions or metalwork, the Inca didn't use metallurgy for tools. These parallels remain circumstantial. Even the sweet potato could have hitched a ride on natural debris, floating across the ocean without human help. The deeper truth may lie in the silence of the sea itself. The Pacific covers a third of the Earth's surface, and its currents are relentless archivists swallowing evidence whole. The real mystery isn't whether the Inca could have reached Polynesia, it's why we're so resistant to the idea. For centuries, Western academia framed exploration as a European monopoly, dismissing indigenous achievements as myth. But as we piece together oral histories, linguistic quirks, and the quiet tenacity of plants, another story emerges, one where the ocean wasn't a barrier but a bridge. Whether by storm-driven accident or deliberate voyage, the Inca and Polynesians may have shared more than we ever imagined. Until a wave tosses up some forgotten raft's lashing or a buried tool confirms the connection, their story lingers in the space between science and legend, a reminder that history's gaps are often as telling as its records. The fall of the Knights Templar in the early 14th century reads like a thriller: secret arrests, whispered confessions, and a grandmaster burned at the stake. But what if some of these warrior monks didn't just vanish into the shadows? What if they sailed into the sunset, carrying their secrets and treasure to a land no European monarch could reach? The theory that Templar ships escaped persecution by crossing the Atlantic isn't just wild speculation. It's woven from tantalizing threads of evidence, folklore, and architectural oddities that refuse to fit neatly into history's boxes. Take the Newport Tower in Rhode Island, a circular stone structure that sparked debates for centuries. At first glance, it could pass for a colonial windmill, except its design bears uncanny resemblances to Templar-built rotundas like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The tower's 8 arched pillars and precise orientation to solstice sunrises suggest something far older and more intentional than a 17th-century farm outbuilding. Even stranger, carbon dating of mortar samples indicates construction centuries before Columbus set sail. Could this be the work of Templar refugees replicating the sacred geometry of their lost homeland? Then there's the Kensington runestone, discovered in Minnesota in 1898. Its runic inscription tells of a Norse Templar expedition reaching North America in 1362, over 100 years before Columbus. Mainstream academia dismisses it as a hoax, pointing to inconsistencies in the runes. But defenders counter that the stone's weathering patterns and mineral deposits match local geology, and its language includes archaic Swedish dialects unlikely to be known by a 19th-century farmer. If genuine, the stone might hint at a Templar-Norse alliance, with knights hitching rides on Viking ships to flee papal persecution. The smoking gun, though, might lie beneath the waves. Off the coast of Nova Scotia, divers have found what appear to be medieval mooring holes carved into shoreline rocks, exactly the kind used by European ships before the age of exploration. Nearby, a sword fragment identified as 14th-century Templar-style steel was dredged from a riverbed. But the most compelling underwater clue is the so-called Money Pit on Oak Island, a booby-trapped shaft where centuries of treasure hunters have uncovered everything from coconut fibers to a cipher stone bearing Templar symbols. Could this elaborate tunnel system be the Templars' final vault, built to safeguard relics like the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail? Skeptics argue these artifacts are either misinterpreted or planted, and they have a point. The Newport Tower's builder, Benedict Arnold, was indeed a colonial governor, though why he'd replicate medieval architecture remains unexplained. The Kensington stone's discoverer had a reputation for tall tales. And Oak Island, its labyrinthine tunnels could just as easily be natural sinkholes or later pirate workings. But here's what's harder to dismiss: the Templars' well-documented nautical prowess. As Europe's first international bankers, they operated a fleet of ships moving treasure between the Holy Land and the West. When their order was crushed, dozens of these vessels reportedly vanished from French ports along with their cargo. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between legend and ledger. Templar ships may not have reached America, but their symbolism certainly did. Early Freemasonic groups, which claimed Templar lineage, were instrumental in founding the United States. The Great Seal's all-seeing eye and unfinished pyramid mirror Templar iconography. Even the name Nova Scotia echoes the Order's Scottish exile. Whether by accident or design, the Templars' mythos became embedded in the New World's DNA, a ghostly compass pointing west toward sanctuary. Until some galleon's barnacled hull emerges from the Atlantic depths, their final voyage remains history's most elusive treasure map. From the Phoenicians navigating under unfamiliar stars to the Incas' sweet potato crossing oceans, these 25 legends remind us that the sea doesn't just separate lands, it weaves them together in ways we're still untangling. Each story, whether etched in runestones or whispered in Polynesian chants, lives in that elusive space between fact and folklore, where a single artifact or storm-shifted sandbar could rewrite everything we thought we knew. What makes these mysteries endure isn't just the vanished ships or the drowned treasures. It's the human audacity they represent, the willingness to sail past the edge of maps armed with nothing but curiosity and courage. Think about it, the same ocean that swallowed Pharaoh Necho's fleet also cradled the Kon-Tiki, proving ancient voyages we once dismissed as impossible were within reach all along. The Viking sagas were once called lies until a longhouse emerged from Newfoundland's soil. Who's to say the next discovery won't surface tomorrow? A Ming porcelain shard in the Caribbean, a Templar anchor lodged in Maine's bedrock, or some half-remembered island rising from the depths, just as Tuanaki's coral terraces did. The sea guards its secrets, but never forever. That's where you come in. Maybe you've stood on a shore watching the horizon and wondered what's really out there. Or perhaps you've dug into family lore, uncovering some fragment, a diary, a carving, that hints at connections deeper than textbooks admit. These legends aren't locked in the past, they're conversations waiting for your voice. So tell us which mystery tugs at your imagination. Is it the Arctic's ghost fleets or Zheng He's vanished junks, the coded maps of Peary Rise, or the Gaelic hymns that might remember Hy-Brasil? Drop your theories below. Every clue, no matter how small, is another ripple in the tide, and this is just the beginning. Beyond these 25 tales, the ocean's archives brim with enigmas we haven't touched yet. The vanishing lights of the Flannan Isles, the Baltic Sea's UFO-like anomaly, or the Mariana Trench's sonar blips that defy explanation. Consider this an open invitation to dive deeper. Hit that subscribe button because we're far from done sailing into the unknown. After all, history's greatest discoveries start with a simple question: what if? The next chapter, like the next wave, is already on its way.